Signals of Silence by TheBeckster. Chapter 12, 26 Weeks. Anakin started in the direction of the temple, but she wasn't ready to go there yet. With how angry she was, everyone would know something was wrong. There would be no avoiding unwanted attention. Still fuming, she steered her speeder off at random into the city and sat down in an alley between a restaurant and a club. She could smell meat searing and vegetables roasting. The dull thud of the bass from the club pulsed through her bones. She could feel the buzz of activity from the kitchen and the rhythmic movements of the club-goers. Anakin began pacing, trying to work out her frustrations. Her thoughts flew in 1,000 infuriating directions. What was she going to do about Organa? It was bad enough that Palpatine knew their secret, but he had found out on his own. Padme had told Organa. How could he do that to her, to their children? Padme knew about her visions. He knew what was coming. He knew what Anakin was running herself ragged, trying to protect him and their children from an impending death. He knew that nobody could know about their children. He knew what had to be done to protect them, and he still told Organa. Anakin's sight began to go fuzzy and dark, and she felt another vision approaching. No! She squeezed her temples, trying to press the vision out from her head, trying to stop it from coming. It didn't help. It never helped. Wails from newborn lungs, tiny hands reaching for comfort, heavy boots, and a blaster silencing the cries. Padme, broken and bleeding, laying on the ground, gasping for breath, wheezing through a punctured lung, eyes full of betrayal and heartbreak. Heavy boots and a black robe standing before him. He manages to whisper her name. Anakin, no. Suddenly, the smell of food turned Anakin's stomach. The club music became a deafening pounding in her ears, shaking her to her core. The buzz of life from the buildings filled her mind with static. The fear from her vision pressed into her. Anakin howled, lashing out at the wall beside her. Her left fist made contact with the durasteel. The shock jarred up her arm and into her body. For a brief moment, she felt a release, a blissful nothing. Then her sensations returned. Pain in her torn skin and bruised knuckles and small fractures in her bones. She swore sharply as she pulled her injured hand close to her chest. Anakin swung again with her robotic fist and the force. The durasteel dented with a satisfying crunch. Growling in frustration, she pressed her head against the wall, trying to control her emotions. Hitting things wasn't going to solve her problems. It would only get her broken knuckles and sore arms. She took several deep, calming breaths as she studied her hand. Blood trickled over her fingers as she flexed them experimentally. The damage wasn't that bad. She wouldn't have to try and explain this to a healer. Anakin took several more long, slow breaths. Maybe if she just talked to Organa, she could ease her mind. She would be able to get a good read on him. She could see if he really was a threat. One of the twins kicked her, as if agreeing with the idea. Anakin climbed back into her speeder, trying to imagine where she would be able to find the Alderaanian senator. It was still relatively early in the evening. He might be out. Finding him in a public place wasn't really an option. Trying to get him alone for a private conversation would look too suspicious. The best place to wait for him would be his home. She took to the air, trusting the Force to guide her to the senator's apartment. Over the the din of Coruscant traffic. She heard the distant rumble of thunder and smelled the hint of rain on the wind. Rain was rare, but in this case it would be beneficial. Most people would go home early to escape the, the inclement weather. She tried to think over what she'd do when she got to speak to Organa. She couldn't kill him, even though that would make keeping her secret that much easier. Threatening him probably wouldn't do much good either. He would probably just as much security as Padme, and judging from the few times Anakin had worked with him, she knew he wouldn't bend under a threat very easily. If at all, then again, he probably never faced anyone like Anakin. Anakin saw a tall, luxury apartment building similar to Padme's rise above the cityscape. She sensed that was where Organa lived. The Force guided her to an upper floor veranda. From what she could see of the apartment, it was dark and empty. Anakin hopped onto the veranda and sent the speeder away to the building's public bay, dis- dis- displaying the security screen was a simple matter of switching the mechanisms with the Force, and Anakin stepped into Organa's apartment. A quick look around showed that it was truly empty. No residents or service staff or security. Not even a service droid waiting to activate if they sensed someone enter the room. Rather odd for a senator. But she wasn't complaining. She stepped back out onto the veranda to wait and watched the city. Its its perpetual motion was almost fascinating to watch from a distance. She felt as if it was like watching a single massive organism rather than millions of individuals. Anakin leaned against the railing, watching and waiting. She didn't even bother to move when it started raining. She enjoyed the cold splash of water on her face and the wet heaviness of her robes as they absorbed more and more water. Bail Organa was happy for the rain. What had been slated to be a long and trying evening in the company of several senators on a rooftop garden party had been cut blissfully short. He didn't even mind driving his open cockpit speeder back home in the rain. He knew his building's garage droids would have it dried and cleaned by the morning. He held his holocom as he approached his apartment. His personal assistant stood 4 inches tall in his hand. He was finishing up his final report for the day. Your 10 a.m. meeting has been pushed back to 11. Senator Anidala has reached out for lunch plans when you return, and your dinner party is already being rescheduled. We can expect a new date in the morning. He read off a datapad rapidly, marking several things as he went. I look forward to it, he stated dryly. Schedule Amidala as soon as possible for lunch. Is my afternoon still clear tomorrow? Yes, Senator. Good. Please tell Captain Antilles to have my ship ready to leave by 2. I'd like to return to Alderaan early, if possible. Bale stopped and keyed in the security code for his apartment. The door slid open smoothly and he stepped into the dark foyer. Is there anything else I can do for you tonight, Senator? No, Rennie. Thank you. Good night then, Senator. Good night. Bale ended the call and wandered farther into his dark apartment. He entered the living area and reached for a light. As the warm yellow glow flooded the room, he saw a dark, mysterious figure standing out in the rain. Immediately, Bale grew defensive. He moved quickly over to a side table and reached for the blaster he kept stashed there. Whoever it was had their back turned and hadn't seemed to notice his return to the apartment. It probably wasn't an assassin. They were making a very poor attempt at hiding. Bale had the impression they were waiting for him, but still he was cautious. He disengaged the blaster safety, softly crept to the veranda, and leveled the blaster at the stranger. "Can I help you?" The hooded figure turned slowly, purposefully, and faced the light. Bale recognized her immediately. He quickly lowered the blaster and regated the safety. "Skywalker, I almost shot you." He stepped aside to let the Jedi into his home. "Don't worry, Senator, I wasn't in any danger," Anakin said coolly, stepping under the awning. Bale wasn't quite sure what to make of her comment, but Skywalker was his guest. Even if she had broken into his apartment and was waiting for him in the rain and loomed over him rather menacingly, proper etiquette came first for his friend's wife. "Please, sit." Bale gestured to several of the comfortable chairs in the lounge area. "Can I get you anything?" "No, thank you." Anakin remained standing just inside the apartment. She lowered her head and Bale caught a brief glimpse of her hand. "Is that blood? Are you hurt?" Anakin quickly shook a sleeve of her robe over her bleeding hand. "It's just a scratch." Bale closed his mouth. A tense silence fell between the two for a moment. "I was wondering how long it would be until you showed up," he finally offered quietly. "You knew I was coming?" "After Gerald, I figured it would only be a matter of time, given what Padme told me." Bale felt Anakin's cold glare intensify. He almost felt a chill in the room. "Anakin, I want to assure you that I mean you absolutely no harm. I bear no ill will towards you or Padme or your children. I will take your secret to my grave." Bale remembered hearing that most Jedi could sense if a person was lying. He hoped Skywalker could sense the truth in his words. Anakin crossed her arms tightly. "You'll forgive me if I don't take your word for it." "No, I understand completely why you wouldn't trust me offhand. We don't know each other very well. For all you know, I am a threat. I know what you're feeling, that desperate need to do anything you can to protect your children." Anakin furrowed her brow at him. "You don't have any children." "Actually, I did. None of them ever got as far as yours have." Bale paused and looked out into the dark, rainy city. "Our oldest would have been 8 this month." He heaved a heavy sigh and continued quieter. "I would have given my life for theirs in a heartbeat." Anakin softened, and her arms fell to her side. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "It's not something I regularly discuss. Only a few of my closest friends know." "Does Padme know?" Anakin asks quietly. "Yes." Organa half smiled at Anakin. "Forgive me if I sound paternal, but a secret like this is a heavy burden to bear alone. Having a friend to confide in can make this ordeal much easier for the both of you." "We were doing just fine before he told you," Anakin stated, the edge returning in her voice. Bale took half a step back and opened his hands, trying to placate Anakin. "I will admit, I may have pressed for answers Padme didn't want to give. You can lay that blame on me. But I had known before Gerald that something had been weighing Padme down. In recent weeks, he's been better." Anakin stiffened at this. Though Bale was unsure whether it was because she realized Padme had been unhappy or because it was bad enough for someone else to notice, he decided a quick change in topic would be the best direction to steer the conversation. You know, seeing Padme's excitement over his impending fatherhood has reopened some discussions in my own life. My wife and I are beginning to seriously consider adopting a baby. A little girl, I think. That's nice, Anakin commented, unsure of where the conversation was going. I hope that when she's older, she's like you. Me? Of course. You're strong, smart, courageous, tenacious, many qualities any father would love to see in his daughter. How would you know? You are a Holonet hero, Bale smirked. Then he added with a soft chuckle. Plus, your biggest fan never fails to bring you up when the conversation turns that way. Anakin looked confused. Who would? Bale smiled again. I may not have known you were married, but I always knew Padme was fond of you. Ever since the war started, he'd been singing your praises whenever he can. Anakin paused and looked down, perhaps to hide a smirk. She took a half step back as she shifted her weight. Her edge was gone. Bale relaxed, knowing he had convinced her of his well-meaning. He offered a final olive branch. I've told Padme this, but you should know too. If there's ever anything you need, no matter how large or small, please don't hesitate to ask. I will do everything within my power to help you too. Thank you, Senator Organa. Anakin looked up and over Bale's shoulder. A slight frown tugged at her lips, and she crossed her arms again. I should go. Is your speeder in the bay? I can walk you down, Bale offered, letting Anakin step past him and towards the front door. Thanks, but I can find my own way. Bale knew better than to try arguing with Skywalker. All right, take care. And Anakin, next time you want to talk, you can just leave a message with my assistant. He'll keep things discreet. Anakin let out a breath that might have been a laugh. I'll keep that in mind. She slid the door open and stepped through, pausing just on the threshold. And, Senator, for what it's worth, I think you would make an excellent father. Padme speaks highly of you as well. Then without another word, she whipped through the door and down the hallway. Bale barely caught a glimpse of the hem of her cloak before the door slid shut again. He re-gated the security system and hoped he had helped solve at least one problem for his friend. He returned to the living area of his apartment and turned on the Holo News before moving on to change out of his wet clothing. When he returned, he noticed with a slight smirk that the reporter was covering the very same Jedi he had just spoken with. The net had a field day when they realized Anakin Skywalker was no longer out on active duty, but resigned to a desk job with the Chancellor. They had initially reported her true position as a liaison, but as time dragged on and it was apparent that she was not returning to the battlefield anytime soon, wild speculations began to fly. Rumors such as a devastating injury or personal protection for Chancellor Palpatine to using her Jedi powers to weed out separatist spies in the Senate cropped up in almost every discussion he had heard, both on and off the net. And those tended to be the tamer ideas. So far, it didn't seem anyone had begun to suspect the real reason for her sudden withdrawal from battle. Bale wasn't sure how much longer she'd be able to go before someone got suspicious. Jedi robes were forgiving, but at some point there would be no hiding the truth. He wondered what storm the net would brew up then. When she got back into her speeder, Anakin felt a little better. Much of her frustrations had been eased, but she was still angry and irritated, and feeling more than a little guilty over how she had stormed off on Padme. She wasn't ready to go back to him, though, not tonight. Her wounds were still a little raw. She steered the speeder towards the temple. Nobody bothered her, and she got back to her room quickly. A fortunate turn of events, because she didn't feel like explaining her bloodied hand to anyone. She stepped into the shower, trying to shake off the chill of the rain and wash the blood off her hands. When she was clean, she dug out her first aid kit and began tending to her battered hand. By the time Anakin had disinfected, treated, and bandaged her hand, her headache had returned with a vengeance, and a deep tiredness seeped into her bones. It seemed her shower had not just washed away the blood, but most of her frustrations as well. Anakin lay down in bed, hoping for sleep to come quickly. Today had not gone as expected. She needed to restart tomorrow. Hopefully her headache would be gone and she could go and apologize to Padme and hopefully get an apology from him too. As she laid there, tossing and turning, sleep eluded her. The twins were being particularly squirmy, and Padme filled her head. Anakin watched time tick away as her guilt grew, until finally she couldn't take it any longer. It was after midnight, but she couldn't wait until tomorrow evening to see Padme again. She got up, dressed, and stole through the temple back to the speeder bay. Padme's apartment was dark when she flew up to the veranda. No surprise, he had probably gone to bed hours ago. She let herself in quickly, stepped out of her boots, and left her wet robe draped over a chair back. She stopped in the bedroom door, listening to Padme. His breathing was slow and even. He was asleep. She stepped into the room fully and shrugged out of her damp robes. She crawled into bed beside Padme. He didn't stir. Anakin wrapped her arm around him and pulled up close. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I love you too." End of chapter.